Herzlich willkommen zu 99 zu 1. Welcome to 99 zu 1. This is an English episode. It's episode 5 of a series, most likely at least the last one for this series regarding this topic and book. The book is called Hezbollah, Mobilization and Power. It's written by Aurélie Daher, and we have already had 4 episodes with her, spoken about various aspects of Hezbollah, both its origins, the reasons for its popularity, and we were hinting at for a couple of episodes now that we would get in the last episode to talking about maybe let's say the international relations aspect of this, so Hezbollah's connections to outside Lebanese outside influences, friends and foes, international maybe imperialists or supporters of Hezbollah. And this is what this episode is going to be about. But before I bring her in, let me introduce Aurélie one more time. Aurélie Daher is a French, English, and Arabic-speaking academic who teaches political science and the sociology of conflicts at University of Paris-Dauphine, PSL, Institut Pratique du Journalisme, IPG, and Sciences Po Paris. She holds a master degree in public management from ESCP Europe, as well as a master's degree in political science, a DEA in sociology of the Muslim world, and a PhD in political science from Sciences Po Paris. Her research focuses on Hezbollah, Middle Eastern Shiism, Lebanese and Middle Eastern politics. She also works on new aspects of Middle Eastern jihadism and its repercussions on European societies. And without further ado, I bring Aurélie in. Welcome back, Aurélie. Helen.
Hello, everybody. Guten Tag.
Guten Tag, bonjour. Nice to have you back. Has been a while, but in the last month and a half, I think it was, events have been, it has been quite eventful, so difficult to catch up. So it was also difficult for us to find a moment where we can make a stand and say, okay, let's say something definitive. Of course, we are also going to cross some of these recent topics, but the general question really is about how to understand Hezbollah and its, let's say, its international relations, but not only its own, foreign politics, but also how are they influenced by foreign actors, and who are they actually enemies with regarding those foreign actors. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about. And the elephant in the room is, of course, Iran. The standard knowledge of every Western guy that has watched 1 or 2 documentaries on state TV is Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran. So maybe let's talk a little bit about that. What is the relationship of Hezbollah to Iran? We already spoke about this in one of the earlier episodes, but maybe let's get to this again. Was Hezbollah just an Iranian creation? Is it just this kind of proxy and basically doing Iran's bidding?
Yes. The way the West tend to see the relationship between Hezbollah and Iran is quite caricatural, or can be quite caricatural. The relationship between Hezbollah and Iran is complex. It's a complex one, and it is one that has evolved a lot over time, over the last 40 years. I mean, it has evolved in its nature, in its essence, the kind of relationship they had, the modalities of the relationship, but also it has also evolved in its intensity, depending on the period. There were times where they were very close, other times where basically the tie became a little bit more loose. Now, as you said it yourself, in many countries, Hezbollah is seen as, the perfect Iranian proxy organization, a group of individuals whose one and only raison d'être, reason to exist, is to obey the orders and achieve the plans of Tehran. If you read most stories present Hezbollah as a militia that was actually created by Iran in order to export, that's the official slogan, to export the Islamic revolution to Lebanon, and from Lebanon maybe to elsewhere in the Middle East. Or it was because the Iranians at minima tried to infiltrate or to set a foot into the Arab-Israeli conflict in the 1980s. And yes, in this scenario, so Hezbollah has no agenda of their own. They're just there to obey the orders of Iran and to defend Iran's interest. And that's quite an incorrect narrative. Like, we really need to nuance that. Okay, the relationship, as quite a lot of relationships in the world, the relationship is way more subtle than that. Okay, and it had, as I said, its ups and downs over the years. It wasn't always a solid reciprocal relationship. I think that when it comes to Hezbollah in Iran, the first thing that needs to be clarified is, before we nuance the relationship, the first thing I think we need to clarify is, what is it exactly that we mean by Iran? Because everybody talks about Iran. Okay, but who is Iran? Iran is not a person. And the Iranian political system actually is very complex. There's more than one center of power in the country. It's like you have 2 or 3 states within the state. And Hezbollah didn't always have like close relations with all of the different centers of power within the Iranian system. And for instance, believe it or not, it is a fact that the president in Iran and the government in Iran, for almost half the age of Hezbollah, for almost 20 years, the president and the government remain rather distant from Hezbollah. That might be surprising, but it is true. So one, I would say, main Western myth that needs to fall regarding the Iran-Hezbollah couple is that one that presents Iran as the one that thought of creating Hezbollah, that planned Hezbollah, and that basically created Hezbollah. It didn't happen like that. Hezbollah, whether we like it or not, is a Lebanese organization that was conceived by Lebanese for Lebanese reasons and with a Lebanese agenda. Now, we can perfectly say that it was created for the bad reasons, but whatever. It was for Lebanese bad or good reasons, whatever. So we mentioned it in a former episode, but quick reminder. So 1982, Israel massively invaded Lebanon for the second time, first time being 1978. The invasion was brutal, bloody, and then we had different resistance groups popping up amongst the Lebanese society to fight back the invasion. Hezbollah, or more precisely, the Islamic Resistance in Lebanon, which is the name of the military part of the organization, was one of those groups. Now, funnily enough, when the founders of Hezbollah at some point tried in 1982 to get some help from the Iranian authorities, they went all the way to Iran. They were thinking mainly of getting, organizational know-how. It wasn't necessarily about money. It was more about like, we're green in this. We don't know how to organize a military force, so we need organizational know-how. We need to know how to start a military organization, how to structure it, how to mobilize also in terms of PR, communication with the society. And then, yes, a little bit of military training too, but that was not necessarily their first need, especially that Hezbollah was created in the northeast of Lebanon, which is already an area that is very gun friendly. So everybody knows how to use basically a gun or an AK-47 in the northeast of Lebanon. So when the Lebanese founders of Hezbollah talked about their project to the Iranians, when I say the Iranians, I'm talking obviously the president, the main representative. So the Iranians, amongst whom Ayatollah Khomeini himself was then guide of the revolution, they were against the idea. They were against the idea, not in favor. The Iranians at that time, the way they thought was that they thought it was a bad idea, to resist against Israel. They thought that the Israeli army was way too strong, couldn't be defeated. And Khomeini at some point even came with a weird argument. He at some point explained that Israel even invaded Lebanon in order to distract Iran from its own war effort against Iraq. Because if you remember, Iran and Iraq, they were at war since 1980, so for 2 years when basically the Israeli invasion happened. And Khomeini was absolutely not in the mood of wasting men, time, energy on Lebanese Shia, from the peripheries, from the countryside, Shia that he saw himself like as, okay, let's put it bluntly, peasants and amateurs. Just like, they're not gonna make it. They don't know how to fight. They're just new at this. They're bumpkins. They don't know how to run and read. Something like that. He was really looking down at them, and he was like, they want to basically go after the most powerful army in the Middle East. That's not gonna be a success. Now, one of the founders, the Lebanese founders of Hezbollah, had friends in the Iranian administration, and basically asked the friends to lobby a little bit in favor of the Lebanese project. And after quite a lot of discussions and pressure, etc., eventually the Iranians sent, we don't have exact figures for obvious reasons, but something between 200, 500 Pasdaran fighters to the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon to kind of train or at least help the Lebanese organize. So I don't know amongst the people listening to us how many of them know what the Pasdarans are. So maybe I'm going to explain a little bit. The Pasdarans are actually one of the Iranian armed forces. Basically they were created by a decree by Khomeini in 1979 because Khomeini didn't trust the regular army that he inherited from the Shah. He thought that maybe the officers might be still, on the imperial side of the ideological barricade, and he thought that the new revolutionary Islamic Iran needed to have another army that would be more loyal to the new regime, and that was basically the Pasdaran. So Khomeini said, okay, whatever, I'm sending 200, 500 guys there, but he also put very clear instructions, and the instructions were this, okay, quotation mark. He said, you train the Lebanese, you show them the ropes, but keep it to the minimum, and under no circumstances you fight in Lebanon against the Israelis. So what does that mean exactly? That means that not only the Iranian leadership didn't believe in the Lebanese being able to come up with results, but also the Iranians were opposed at the idea of seeing their fighters, okay, meaning Iranian fighters, potentially die on a non-Iranian soil, and for a war that eventually, didn't concern them directly. So that was a big no. And by the way, that idea of the Iranians, acting as consultants, as advisors, as trainers, but refusing completely to put boots on in the field and fight themselves is something that we have seen as constant over the years, because this is also the way they acted in Syria. It is a feature that actually never changed till today.
Yeah, it's actually something that people that are siding with this resistance axis, the so-called, are actually also complaining about actively.
Exactly.
And there was also this notion of Iran actually, for example, holding back Hezbollah at the beginning of this year, of this war in Gaza, where Hezbollah, this is just rumors, but Hezbollah wanted actually to go more into support for Gaza, and also asked for Iranian support, and Iran came with a no there. So also there you see that they're quite diverging interests at times. But I can already see the comments going crazy about this and saying, what? Now Aurélie says it's just a little bit of support. I don't know, 500 people in the beginning, and they trained Hezbollah a little bit, and that's it. Isn't there more to it? Like, what's there? It's still kind of seems, and also, when Hassan Nasrallah was killed, and when there were attacks on Iran by Israel, etc. It seems like they are kind of close. So how did they get close together like this?
Yes, but what I said and what I described was the beginning.
Right. Okay.
I was talking about the moment of the foundation, okay, and the role of Iran, in particular, in the foundation of Hezbollah. But yes, obviously things evolved over time, and the ties obviously became more tight and closer. But again, that wasn't a linear line, So here's the thing: Okay, in Iran, I'm going to maybe give a little bit more details about that complex political system. At the same time, don't worry, I'm not going to give you a class on the institutional system in Iran. But basically,
that's going to be the next series then of 5 episodes.
Okay, interesting. So, but no, to make a long story short, and in order for things to be understandable, in Iran, basically, you have, let's put it this way, 3 different centers of power. Okay, 3 different centers of power that had different approaches to Hezbollah depending on the period of time. Okay, this is what the first one is what I call the regular state. Okay, basically, I mean it's the president of the republic that is elected by the people and the government. Okay, that's basically, for me, it's one team. And PS, they do not have a prime minister position in Iran. Okay, the president that is elected is president of the republic and at the same time is head of government. Okay, then second center of power, there's the guide of the revolution. Okay, and that is a position that is held by an ayatollah, so a very important cleric. Okay, and that ayatollah, while basically the the president and the government team are on the day-to-day operations, etc., and there's a democratic process that keeps changing them all the time, every 4 years. Basically, then there's the guide. The guide acts as the great supervisor, if you like it, a great supervisor of the ideological life of the country. And this one obviously takes the position for life. Okay, and he basically checks that the policies that are pushed forward by the government on one side and the founding values and principles of the Iranian understanding of Islamic power, that they match, basically. So it's like you have like that main orchestra maestro that checks that basically everything is coherent and consistent. And then you have that military power that I kind of mentioned. And in Iran, that military power, or that big security forces pole, is represented by 3 different military groups. You have obviously the regular army that I mentioned, that was inherited from the previous regime, and those guys basically, the current regime does not trust them that much, doesn't mobilize them that much, well, at least not for defending the country against external threat. That task is given to the Pasdaran, so the guardians of the revolution. In English, they call them the IRGC, so the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps. Okay, and the Pasdaran are the real, in practice, in the day-to-day operations. Basically, they are the true army, the real army. And then there's that third military group, which is the Basij, meaning the mobilized ones. And those guys basically are more mobilized when it comes to defending the Islamic Republic from inside threats. So, long story short, when it comes to the military, we have that regular army, old guys in their barracks. Nobody asked them anything, or almost. I'm caricaturing a little bit, but basically they're not in the center of the military action. Then we have the Pasdaran, who works on defending the country against external threat, and obviously they're also in charge with anything related to strategic projection in the Middle East. This is where Hezbollah is going to have its place. And then they have the Basij, who are working on the inwards, I would say. Okay, so Hezbollah, initially, when Hezbollah started, he didn't have a true support from the guide, and obviously he didn't have any from the president. So the guide at that time, we're talking 1982, that was Khomeini, and the president was Ali Khamenei. So I know Khomeini, they sound a little bit the same.
Yes, confusing.
Yeah, it's confusing, but 2 different guys. So Khomeini, the guide, Khamenei, the president. And neither of them was really putting or ready to bet on that Hezbollah project. Now, Khomeini died in 1989, and Khamenei, the president, became the guide to replace him. Okay, the president became Ali Akbar Rafsanjani. Same thing, Rafsanjani not interested in Hezbollah at all, quite the opposite. In 1989, he stopped all sorts of financial contribution to the Hezbollah experiment. because between 82 and 89, the Iranians did send a little bit of money, but nothing serious to help Hezbollah grow. So Rafsanjani was going to say, no more money for you guys. And he literally said, I quote, when he talked to Hezbollah, you need to become a party just like any other in Lebanon, meaning he was officially expressing his non-interest in the organization whatsoever. Now, weirdly enough, the fact that the Iranians, the president, the government really cut the ties with Hezbollah in a way that was something that was quite helpful for Hezbollah, because this is the moment, I'm talking the 90s, where Hezbollah understood that they need to develop their own self-funding, association, organization, companies, etc. They have to find also money on their own and not rely in everything on Iran. So the tie, however, so as I said, the guide not really interested, the president not interested at all. So the real tie, and that was since the beginning, since 82, was between the Islamic resistance, the military part of Hezbollah, and the Pasdaran. And the Pasdaran never ever basically cut their ties with Hezbollah for a very simple reason, which is the Pasdaran, who eventually were in contact with the Lebanese on the ground, in the field, the guys who trained them, basically. Funnily enough, those 200, 500 guys, eventually, part of them went back home in the mid-90s, job done. The Lebanese can now work on their own. They don't need us. We trained them the best we could. So some of them left, but quite a lot stayed in Lebanon, even, after their job was done, and they married Lebanese ladies, and, they basically merged into the Lebanese societies. And the fact that, those Pasdaran stayed quite a lot of time, quite a lot of years with Hezbollah. And so Hezbollah, start, emerge, grow, get more sophisticated, more professional, that obviously led to interpersonal ties, personal ties between both leaderships, that of Hezbollah and that of the Pasdarans. So, I mean, it's like, a teacher who would see their student or their pupils, they would watch them firsthand progress, and because they stayed in Lebanon, so the tie was never cut, Now, as I said, in the meantime, Hezbollah remained a remote topic for the Iranian president, to some extent to the guide. But what eventually made the guide, and I'm talking here about Khamenei, not Khomeini, what made Khamenei a little bit more interested in Hezbollah is that the guide in Iran, back home, has a good relationship with the Pasdaran. He didn't always see eye to eye with his presidents. Some of them obviously came and then left. But with the Pasdaran, the relationship is way more solid. So some introductions, over the years were made, those Pasdarans that I was talking about, who knew personally firsthand some Hezbollah military officers. So those guys were taken to Iran a few times to meet the guides, etc. So we had a certain number of special visits, especially after the liberation of 2000, because obviously for the Iranians, it was a surprise. It was a surprise for the Israelis. It was a surprise for the Lebanese. 2000 was a surprise for everybody, but also a surprise for the Iranians. They were like, oh, okay, so these Lebanese we thought they couldn't do anything. They did it. And in the same time, if we go back to the 90s and the 2000s, we had two mandates for two presidents. So two Iranian presidents had two mandates, each one of them. President Rafsanjani, as I mentioned, from 1989 to 1997. After him came President Khatami from 1997 to 2005. Both cases, the Iranian state, again, not much interested in Hezbollah. I remember Khatami came to Lebanon in the early 2000s. He was way more interested in having a relationship with the Sunni Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri. He invited him 3 days in Tehran. It was all about the relationship with the Sunnis and the premiership. Hezbollah had to wait its turn to obviously meet Khatami. And, Khatami didn't treat Hezbollah any different from any other government. The thing that completely changed everything and that brought that kind of trio back together, meaning the guide, the president/government in Iran, and Hezbollah into a strong bond, what really brought them together is 2006, is the 33 days war. Because the year before, 2005, end of the mandate of Khatami, guess who's elected president in Iran? Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Ahmadinejad is himself a former Pasdaran. So he is already predisposed to be interested in Hezbollah, or at least take them seriously, or at least, let's listen to those guys, what they have to say. Why not? I'm not gonna look down at them. And then guess what? He's elected 2005, 2006. Hezbollah, after liberating South Lebanon in 2000, wins over Israel when it was absolutely not expected, wins over Israel after the 33-day war. And this is where the Iranian state, the representative of the Iranian state, meaning the president and the government, this is where they said, what about we work from a closer place with those Lebanese guys? We thought they were bumpkins. Turn out they have great potential, and they might be useful for us in our projection, regional projection of our, military influence.
Okay, I have a quick follow-up, because, it's one thing that is probably not familiar with people here in the West is like this notion. The way that you depicted this is that there is, we have the government, then we have the guide, and then we have a military branch, which itself consists out of at least three different units. And then like the one that projects all the power and military power to the outside are the Pasdaran, or this Revolutionary Guard Corps. And it sounds a little bit like they are acting with some kind of autonomy from the rest of the state and their agenda. When you're talking about the president not wanting to involve with Hezbollah, cutting ties, or at least reducing ties, reducing money, saying become a party. At the same time, the Pasdaran, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, still keeping up that relation and like basically defying, to some extent, that governmental guideline. That seems like a weird separation that we in the West probably can't really imagine. Like, how does this work?
It's not necessarily a separation. It's more like a partnership or distribution of, well, not distribution of power, but let's put it this way. In any state, you have institutions who have a power of influence within the system way more than others. Okay, and in the case of Iran, so the Pasdaran are not just a military power. There's also something else that I didn't mention because obviously it wasn't. It's not necessarily relevant for Hezbollah, but it's definitely relevant to answer your question, and the question is relevant. The Pasdaran over the years also came to organize also as an economic actor in Iran. Okay, they own quite a lot of companies. They have clientelist networks, I would put it this way, in some economic sectors. So, they are military, but they can also sometimes, swap their military uniform for, regular suit. Well, no tie, because they don't wear ties in Iran, but they can also be, into very domestic, economic oriented negotiations with the power. They also have to obviously take into consideration the law, the type of law. They're going to lobby the parliament, just like any other institutions you might have. In other countries, it's going to be the media. In other, like the Department of Information. In other countries, it's going to be the Ministry of Industries. It depends basically on how your economy is built. You're going to have a certain number of actors, institutional actors, who are part of that economy, and yes, that's gonna impact the whole internal game, the domestic game, and the Pasdaran are obviously a big economic power, big economic player, and that gives them some room for maneuver when it comes, you know, to making decisions, when it comes to, you know, external policy. They kind of find a way to say, okay, we have room for negotiating, to say, well, we don't necessarily quite agree with, you know, the president in place, with his government when it comes to external choices. And obviously, you know, we have the means to bring them into listening a little bit more to our arguments through other means, economic means, etc. But that's I would say it's not something that is unique to Iran. You can find it in all states, actually, worldwide.
Yeah. Okay. Then let's get back to the story, because in 2006 Israel basically is defeated by Hezbollah, and Hezbollah comes out kind of on top after even a huge bombing campaign of the whole country. And I think 1,600, 1,700 people killed in Lebanon. Israel, how we say in Arabic, they ate a lot of air. in the south of Lebanon, they really got defeated very harshly. It was a big trauma for them.
The 3-day invasion was very impressive.
Exactly, and that reverberates throughout the world. I mean, I know of whole CIA task forces that started analyzing this and trying to figure out
the Lebanese
how this was
ourselves. We were watching it on
possible.
TV, and we couldn't believe it.
Yes.
We were watching it, and we couldn't believe it. I remember, there was that moment when because they talk a lot about, Resolution 1701, right? And I don't know how they talk about it in the German media, but in the French media, for instance, they keep, every time they say Resolution 1701, that obviously is discussed these days, and the Israelis are trying to force the Lebanese implement it. The French media always say 1701 that put an end to the war of 2006. That put an end to. That's absolutely not the resolution that put an end to the 2006. It's the invasion. It's the failure of the vast invasion by the Israelis that eventually led the Israelis to raise the white flag and say, okay, enough. Because actually, there's something interesting in that resolution. There's no deadline for a ceasefire. There's no mention for any time for the war to stop. So not only it didn't put an end to the war of 2006, but quite the opposite. It doesn't mention. I mean, the war of 2006 could have,
kept going.
Keep going for ages. And Resolution 1701 wasn't mentioning anything about it. But what happened is the resolution was voted on the 11th, and on the 12th, the Israelis decided to launch that major land invasion, because so far they were attacking only from the air. They were air bombardment through the air military forces, and then they decided to go on the ground. And we had 40,000 Israelis, 40,000 Israeli troops facing between 2,500 and 5,000 top IRL combatant. And I remember we watched it, and when we were in Lebanon, and when we heard the Israelis were launching the invasion, everybody got scared in Lebanon, and everybody remembered 1982, and everybody was like, oh, Jesus Christ, now they're going to go all the way to Beirut, and they're going to do what they did, and they're going to force us into, I don't know, electing a new president, just like they did in 82.
Which is what they wanted. They wanted to go to Beirut. That's some of them stated that openly. But anyway, yeah.
It's complicated because as the Winograd Commission showed, basically the Israeli plans were quite messy in 2006. Quite messy. But so I remember we watched it, and we saw, it was shot live by the Lebanese TV channels. We could see coming, from behind the Israeli border, coming into Lebanon, like a whole line of tanks, coming towards us. So you had the first tank, and then the second one, and the third one, etc., coming, tack, 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 and entering Lebanon. And all the Lebanese were like, excuse my French, we were in our trousers. We were really scared. Plus, at that time in 2006, there was a certainty, let's put it this way, there was that idea that everybody was convinced with that was the Israeli Merkava, so tank, basically, is a kind of tank that cannot be destroyed. They're
Yeah. The Smith they still have going today. Yeah.
There isn't any rocket in the world that can destroy a Merkava. Okay, that was the idea that everybody was convinced with in the Middle East. And we saw that whole line of Merkavas coming into suddenly out of nowhere, and we saw it live. We heard a rocket swing on the first, hitting the very first Merkava entering Lebanon. The Merkava imploded like a small mushroom, went and fell like this. One rocket right in the center, right on the head, and then everybody's like, what? Where did the rocket came from? Who shot the rocket? Obviously, the Israel, and then the Merkava is gone. But guess what? Count to three. 1, 2, 3. Second Merkava, just the other one, the second one. Boom! Another rocket. No more second Merkava. Then again, 1, 2, 3. Third Merkava. Bam! And then what we could see is obviously all the drivers of the Merkavas of this line hit the brake. Rare, c'est parti, and they all went back. That was also obviously part of what created that whole legend, over the Israel. But what I mean is everybody was surprised. The Lebanese, the Iranians, yes, as you mentioned, the CIA, the Israelis, everybody was surprised by what happened in 2006. Absolutely.
So what happens then? The Iranians now have that that memory from 2006. It makes them more interested in Hezbollah and like everybody else trying to figure out how that was possible. And I think then the next big stage that Hezbollah appeared on will probably be the war in Syria. So when the civil war started and when Hezbollah also ultimately came to be a party in this war. So can you talk about this? How did that continue?
Yes. So I would say the moment of the true connection between Hezbollah and the various centers of power in Iran is definitely 2006. And then the relationship obviously grew even more and tighter in starting 2012, 2013. Because what happened is this: they became, through the civil war in Syria, more codependent. It's not a relationship of proxy and then, answering to its master. It's not like there's the little obedient troops and then the master. It's a codependent thing. The Iranians, starting from the Syrian war, really showed how much they need Hezbollah as much as Hezbollah need the Iranians. So rather than having a relationship where you have a hierarchy, basically the differential in terms of hierarchy basically really tightened. And I'm not going to say it's an equal to equal kind of relationship, obviously, but it became something more, I would say, closer to a partnership, rather than just Hezbollah being at the orders of the Iranians. Doesn't work like that. We had also a kind of distribution between the two, distribution of tasks and roles and power in a very complementary way. So on one side we could see that Hezbollah was in charge of fighting in the battlefields, putting basically troops on the ground, doing all the combat, basically taking care of the combat operations. The Iranians, as we already mentioned, they acted as counselors and advisors. But something else happened here is that this time we could see that, I heard at that time I did a few interviews with some pasdarans, that were active in Syria, and from time to time they would come to Lebanon, to rest, have a little bit of fun, what we call in French le repos du guerrier. The rest of the warrior, the warriors need a little bit of resting after the combat before going back, to war. So I met a few pasdaran in Lebanon, and basically they ended up very easily, very modestly admit that the situation was quite different from the way things were between the Pasdaran and Hezbollah in the early 80s, in the sense that in the early 80s it was, I mean, Hezbollah were the disciples and they were learning the art of combat, of war from the Iranians, but since 2012 it's the other way around. We could see like IRL officers going to Iran and teach, the young Pasdaran officers in the military schools of Tehran. We could see Hezbollah teaching this time the art of combat to the Iranians. And in the same time, if you think about it, it's only logical, because at the end of the day, Hezbollah, they fought for so many years in Lebanon against the Israeli occupation, and then they fought in 2006, etc. While the Iranians, if you think about it, when was the last time that the Iranians really fought on the ground against a regular army? That was 1988 against the Iraqis. So that means that since then we had what? 3 generations of Pasdaran who never saw with their own eyes or never participated in a battlefield. So it's, I would say, it's the logical track of history, where basically at some point the disciples become, more talented than their masters, and the relationship get reversed. And so that also impacted the relationship between Hezbollah and the Pasdaran, or Hezbollah and Iran, in the sense that Iran gave way more room to Hezbollah because of the trust. And that as I said, that reversed those reversed roles. The Iranians made more room to Hezbollah in their own military system, projection system, where basically they put Hezbollah in charge with training, for instance, the other groups that the Iranian military forces had ties with. And it is, for instance, the IRL officers who taught the Iraqi militias, I'm talking Hashd al-Shabi, for instance, or those who are part of the Hashd al-Shabi, or even the Houthi Yemenis. Okay, it's the IRL officers who train those guys how to use the Iranian military R&D, research and development, or the weaponry, the technology, etc. Basically, it's not the Iranians who taught them. It's the IRL, it's the Lebanese who taught the Iraqis and the Yemenis how to use Iranian technology. And that shows that, yes, since the war in Syria, I mean, obviously the war in Syria kind of brought the level of trust and interdependency between the two to another level, to a higher level.
Right. And then, I mean, since then, since the Syrian civil war, there is this talk of this axis of resistance. And I mean, the axis of resistance being Iran, and then all those actors that you just called, which is, of course, Hezbollah, then the Iraqi militias, the Houthis, etc. But then, of course, there is also Syria, which is Bashar al-Assad, who is being also described as taking part in this axis of resistance. So maybe, and of course, one of the most important talking points around is that basically Hezbollah came to help Bashar al-Assad to win the war, and was actually one of the deciding, maybe not the deciding, but one of the deciding factors in actually winning that war for Bashar al-Assad. So what's the relationship between Hezbollah and, or what was it between Hezbollah and Bashar al-Assad? And is that similar to what we've seen with the relationship in Iran?
Wow, no, not at all. The relationship with Syria is completely different than the relationship with Iran. Plus, maybe in order to understand what happened with Bashar, we need to talk a little bit what happened with the father, Hafiz, because the relationship already started during, under Hafiz. So Hafiz al-Assad became officially president in 1970. Died in 2000. Funny enough, he died in June 2000, so just a few weeks after the liberation. And then Bashar took over. The relationship between Hezbollah and Iran on one side, and the one between Hezbollah and Syria on the Syrian former regime is totally different at so many levels. And it's so funny that we mentioned that now, because for years, the West would see Hezbollah as not just a proxy of Iran, but also a proxy of Syria, and you're just obeying the Assad family, etc. And that's completely untrue.
It's a double proxy, obeying two masters.
Two masters.
Mhm.
And two masters plus, funny enough, nobody took ever into consideration that while the two masters were officially allies, they also had great competitions between the two, and things were not always lovey-dovey, let's put it this way, between Tehran and Damascus. But I'm going to say something that's going to sound maybe a little bit weird, especially from a Western point of view. But especially after years where the IRL was fighting in Syria on Bashar al-Assad's side, believe it or not, Hezbollah never liked the Assads, never liked the Assad regime. They didn't like the father, they didn't like the son either. And they cordially loathed the Syrian army too. So very quick travel into the past and talking a little bit about the Hafez al-Assad years very quickly. The relationship was kind of almost all the time rocky, or at least let's put it this way. Hezbollah would keep walking on eggshells with the Syrians, and the Syrians were really keen on maintaining Hezbollah as something they could control, or at least maybe not, they wouldn't be able to monitor it or like drive it or lead it, not possible, but at least make sure the Syrians always wanted to make sure that Hezbollah was not going to become big enough to rally all the Lebanese around it, or enough Lebanese around it. The politics of the Assad, the policy of the Assad in Lebanon has always been divide to conquer. And the rationality was, we need to keep all the Lebanese groups, whatever their ideology, small and in competition with each other, bickering against each other, because we need to maintain the legitimacy of our presence in Lebanon. As the Lebanese, they keep fighting each other. Nobody is capable of basically ruling properly the country. They need us. The moment we have in Lebanon a political group or an ideology that's going to be transconfessional, that's going to gather people around one same project, that means that eventually the door gets open for Syria to get out and go back home. And obviously this is not what the Syrians wanted. So during already the Hafez al-Assad years, the relationship between Hezbollah and Syria was quite fragile. And we had some episodes basically of open animosity and actually bloody episodes between the two. I'm going to give you an example. 1987, this is 1987. This is that episode. So 1987 is kind of like 40 years ago, almost. Even today, like even the young Hezbollah people, they still talk about it. That tells you about how much they were traumatized by this. But in 1987, for instance, the Syrian army executed out of nowhere more than 25 Hezbollah members in Beirut. Okay. And the reason for that was, you'll never believe it, they had a quarrel over the lawn. Do you know what the lawn is? The lawn before the barracks, okay, of a Hezbollah headquarters. So let's put it this way. Hezbollah had like a kind of a barrack or a little headquarter in Beirut, okay? There was like the gardener, or not even the official gardener. It's like two guys who have like a green thumb, they wanted to put a little bit of lawn, a few flowers in front of it, but, to make the entrance of the barracks like nice. And here comes like that Syrian big tank, and goes on the lawn, destroys everything. A few Hezbollah guys get out of the barracks, say, hey, what the heck are you doing? Hey, oh, my flowers, no. The officer gets out of the tank, grabs all the Hezbollah guys who were there, say, okay, stand in front of the wall, bam, 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 popped a bullet in the brain behind the head of all the Hezbollah members. Iran yelled, Hezbollah yelled, and eventually Iran said, if you're too loud, you're gonna regret it, etc. Then Iran had to intervene. Iran had to tell the Hezbollah leadership, like, no retaliation, keep your mouth shut. So yeah, so we have a certain number of episodes like that Hezbollah hasn't forgotten about the Assads. Another thing, more generally, okay, Hezbollah is whatever it is. Hezbollah is Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is also Lebanese, and just like any other Lebanese, they did not savor, for instance, the years of Syrian tutelage over Lebanon from 1990 to 2005. Okay, the Lebanese have a very particular relationship to Syria, independently from any, ideology, etc. From the very beginning, the creation of Lebanon actually was, at least a part of it, a part of Syria that was, taking away from the big, Syrian project, the Grand Syria project, was taken away from the French, from Syria, in order to create that little a country 1/3 of Belgium called Lebanon. And the Lebanese, since then, part of their national identity, part of being a Lebanese, is also working on maintaining the Syrian appetites away from the Lebanese territory, the Lebanese collective identity, etc., etc. And Hezbollah is no exception. Okay, Hezbollah is no exception. So Hezbollah, when we talk about the relationship with Syria, there's a little bit of confusion. The real protege of Syria in Lebanon was never Hezbollah. It's Amal, okay, the second main Shiite party that is head by Nabih Berri, still today the head of parliament in Lebanon. And Hezbollah joined the institutional life in running for legislative elections as early as 1992. All the same, they were never part of the government before 2005. That's quite recent. They're in parliament since 92, but in the government since 2005. Why? Because Syria, again, didn't want them to be part of the government. Again, because they didn't want Hezbollah to become too big. Okay, so they wanted to give basically room and all the juicy portfolios to their other Shiite protege, Amal, but keep Hezbollah away from the executive power. That's also something Hezbollah didn't forget about. And as a consequence, and for years, Iran acted in Lebanon as the protector of Hezbollah, and Syria favored Amal. And during the tutelage, Syria had the upper hand of the Lebanese internal affairs, and sometimes, the Iranians would tell Hezbollah, keep your heads down, lay low, suffer in silence, do not retaliate, whether against the Syrian troops or against Amal. And at some point, by the way, in the 80s, Amal and Hezbollah waged war against each other. That went pretty bad, at some point quite bloody. And then again, Iran and Syria intervened many times to obtain a ceasefire between the two. And again, Syria would favor Amal over Hezbollah all the time. So no, Hezbollah has quite a lot of, like the list of complaints by Hezbollah against the Assad regimes, whether the fathers or the sons, is quite long.
I mean, with an organization so much concerned with the national autonomy and integrity of Lebanon, that's, basically what their resistance was about, to fight the Israeli occupation. That all sounds like they should have also kind of rebelled against Syria, didn't they? Like, of course they fought Amal. You talked about that now, but didn't they also rebel against the tutelage of Syria and their involvement?
They didn't act militarily against Syria in the sense of trying to kick Syria out. In the same time, funny enough, in 2005, when basically, you had those protests in Beirut after the assassination of Rafiq al-Hariri, those protests, popular protests, asking for the end of the tutelage and Syria, going back to the other side of the border. Everybody was like, oh my God, Syria is going to leave, and that's bad news for Hezbollah. That means that Hezbollah, Hezbollah is over. Hezbollah will lose their protectors, and they're going to weaken. Funny enough, nobody noticed that Hezbollah never, ever, ever, in 2005, even to start 2004, they never said, no, we want to fight, we want Syria to stay. And quite interestingly, when they left, Hezbollah, like, they had so many parties to celebrate the departures of the Syrians, because they were just like any other political parties in Lebanon. They were also constrained by the Syrian tutelage, all the same. So they never fought, just like they fought, for instance, against Israel. They never fought militarily to kick the Syrians out, but they definitely did everything they could, when they could, with the margin, with the room for maneuver that they had. Every time they could say no to the Syrians, they did. I'm going to give you a few examples. So during the tutelage years, for instance, so we had a certain number of, series of legislative elections. And interestingly, 1992, 96, 2000, obviously the popularity of Hezbollah was growing from its successes against the Israelis. And we could see that the Shia were voting for Hezbollah, like they were happy to vote for Hezbollah, no need to pay them, no need to threaten them to vote for Hezbollah. And Amal obviously was pissed. That other Shiite party that was more into, corruption, etc. No. They were not obviously as popular as Hezbollah, and they complained about it to Damascus and said, they're going to steal the Shiite votes at every election, so do something about it. And the Syrians at every election would, go and negotiate with Hezbollah, being very firm, and asking for Hezbollah to put Shiite Amal candidates on their list, because in Lebanon for legislative elections you don't vote for individuals, you vote for a whole list. So the idea was, basically Syria wanted Hezbollah to put Amal guys on their list. Hezbollah never said yes, never accepted. They never stepped back, and they never shared the electoral lists with Amal. Another thing is, when the last months of the Israeli occupation, when Ehud Barak was saying, we're thinking of withdrawing, etc., the Syrians were quite worried. The Syrians didn't want Israel to withdraw from South Lebanon, because in the Ta'if agreement that put an end to the civil war, there's a clause, there's a little paragraph, and that paragraph says, within 2 years after Israel leaves Lebanon, Syria will have to, prepare to leave the country too. If one day, this is what the text says, if one day Israel were to leave Lebanon, okay, no more Israeli occupation, Syria has 2 years to pack and leave too. So obviously the Syrians didn't want the Israelis to leave South Lebanon. And when basically the Israelis started to make their preparation for their withdrawal in 2000, what the IRL did is, the more the Israelis were preparing to withdraw, the more Hezbollah was augmenting, I would say, was pushing forward the number of operations against the Israelis, the intensity of the attacks against the Israelis. Basically, they were doubling, tripling their war effort against the Israelis to have the Israelis get away like even quicker than expected.
Yeah, they were supposed to leave, and they said something, they're going to leave in July or something.
July.
And Hezbollah was like, no, not July, you're leaving now.
You're leaving earlier.
Yeah.
You're going to leave in May.
Right.
So, you're going to leave in May. Basically, the idea is you won't leave in July. You're gonna leave before that. And the more the IRL was putting heat on the Israelis, the more the Assads were calling from Damascus, cool it down, cool it down, cool it down. And they were like, no way. we're not taking any directions, anything from, we're not listening to the Syrians, and we don't care what Damascus can think of what we're doing in South Lebanon. We don't want the Israelis in the house anymore, whether Damascus likes it or not. That does not going to change anything. So yes, there was a little bit of room for maneuver that definitely Hezbollah used anytime it could to say no to the Assad regime, but then again, yes, they didn't carry out any frontal attack against the Syrians to kick them out. No.
So then, how is it that in 2011, 2012, they were so willing and were so quick to come to Assad's, to basically come to save him. Because, I mean, not only all this, what you just explained, which is basically an animosity that was there all the time, but also like that move was even for Hezbollah very controversial, and there were a lot of voices that were worried about this and were against it because they knew what kind of nice person Assad was. So how about that?
I wouldn't say they were quick, actually, to save Bashar. Quite the opposite. They really took their time. They really tried to patch things differently than militarily. They really tried to cool down. I remember, in 2011, when those protests started in Syria, etc. The first time Hassan Nasrallah, former Secretary General of Hezbollah, gave a speech about that, he was very clear about, the protesters might have actually a point when they criticized the regime. He said it openly. But this is why we invite the regime to meet the leaders of the protest. What about you guys sit around a table? What about you negotiate? What about you try to favor the political solutions to an armed solution? They were really not comfortable at the idea of a militarization of the protest. And in 2012, they did intervene a few times in Syria, but it was very punctual, very precise, and they didn't do it to support the regime. They went there to help the Iranian military presence in some barracks and some bases. Basically, the Iranians had a few bases, military bases. So they went there to help them defend basically their premises, etc. But it was not in defense of the regime. The real intervention of the IRL in Syria, like I'm sending troops in the battlefields on the side of the Syrian troops in order to basically help Bashar, was actually May 2013, so almost 2 years after the start of the protest in Syria. And what we need to keep in mind is when they initially went in 2013, they weren't sure they could save the regime. It was not about really saving the regime. They went to defend their own interests and those of the Iranians, because what happens is this. Basically, Syria, in the Iranian/Hezbollah game, Syria is a piece of the puzzle, okay, that they need, but they need it mainly, obviously, to send through the Iranian military equipments from Iran to Lebanon, okay? Let's put it this way. Syria is just in the middle of the passage, okay, that they have to go through. But apart from that, they don't care much about Syria. They're not gaining anything from Syria. So the idea was this. Okay, maybe Bashar is going to fall, which is not necessarily bad news because we don't like him and he doesn't like us. But what we need all the same to have in Syria is to maintain a haven, a part, the Syrian territory. It doesn't need to be super huge, but we need a piece of that Syrian territory that would remain, whatever happens, whoever takes power after Bashar in Damascus. We need that part of the Syrian territory to remain Hezbollah-friendly, Iranian-friendly, right? And it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that where the IRL intervened in May 2013 was the northwest of Syria. The northwest of Syria is basically where you have a concentration of the Christian communities, okay, who were kind of supportive of Bashar, or at least they don't want an Islamic State kind of power, obviously, in Damascus. And this is also where you have the majority of the Alawi community, which is the Alawis are kind of Shia, and obviously that's the community of the Assad family. So
it's also the territorial connection from North Lebanon to Iran.
Plus, yes, exactly. Yes. It's very close to the borders. I mean, it's connected to the border of Lebanon, or at least to the part of Lebanon that is also mainly Shia Christian and Hezbollah friendly. So it's no coincidence that basically they intervened there first, and they tried to secure that area first. And it's only when they saw that they were doing good in the field, that etc., that little by little, piece by piece, they worked on saving Bashar, or at least kind of reinstalling him in the saddle, putting him in the saddle again. And as long as they didn't find anyone they felt comfortable with to replace Bashar, well, the only option was, we're going to work on maintaining him in power. But they were ready to accept a Syria that would fall in the hands of anti-Hezbollah people, anti-Iranian people, as long as I said, they could maintain a little part where basically they could do their business as usual. Another thing I think we must keep in mind is that when that whole protest started in Syria, at some point, Hezbollah in Iran, they were ready to negotiate, enter talks with whatever kind of regime would succeed Bashar. As I said, they were not, crazily attached to the idea of maintaining him. Okay. The problem is this. We had declarations by Syrian leaders, by heads of the protest movements, and some of them were actually based in Paris, and even what we called the Conseil National Syrien, so basically the Syrian National Council, which is a little bit like the government in exile that was supposed to take over once Bashar fell. They were in Paris, and the problem is that they made declaration. They kind of, what we call it in French, ils ont vendu la peau de l'ours avant de l'avoir tué. They sold the skin of the bear before killing it. So they went a little bit, ahead of themselves, and they kind of already announced everything they would do once they take power. They didn't wait for Bashar to fall to announce their program. And one main thing they really insisted is the moment they would take power, they would cut ties with Iran, and they would sign a peace treaty with Israel, and any information they had, intel, military, everything they had, all the data on Hezbollah, basically they would give to the Israelis. Or at least this is how Hezbollah understood it. And this is where suddenly for Hezbollah in Iran it was like, okay, not possible. We cannot work with these guys, so we don't have the choice this time. We have to go and save Bashar, whatever they might have thought of him.
Okay, interesting. Jump 10 years later, 2024, and Bashar al-Assad basically falls in like a week without a lot of fighting. With Hezbollah not really being involved in any kind of military resistance fighting operation. How is that they did not try to save him this time? Because, I mean, the jihadists that were on their way to Damascus, they were not different, maybe even worse than what these Syrian exile guys proclaimed back then for Hezbollah's interest. And of course, the dominant narrative from Israel and the West is, Israel has damaged Hezbollah in Lebanon so much that they are basically incapacitated, and they couldn't uphold any kind of defense of the Assad regime anymore. So how would you explain this?
No, there's a piece of the puzzle missing in the narrative, which is that there had been talks before Bashar falls and before Ahmad al-Shara, aka Julani, starts his power engine, of his march over Damascus. Ahead of that, before that, we had discussions between the Turks, the Iranians, and the Russians about what to do with Bashar. And so obviously, from what showed in the region in the last 10 years, Bashar didn't really repay properly the investment of his allies into saving his regime. Okay, so we had an axis of resistance, which is supposedly teamwork. Everybody brings in, whatever they can bring. So not only he was never active, Bashar was never active in the axis of resistance. I mean, obviously, everybody saw it. Like for almost a year and a half or 15 months, we had like Israel, at war, Gaza, Lebanon, and the big missing party in the story was Syria. Like, where is Bashar? You know, we saw it very clearly in 2023, 2024. So not only he never participated in the collective effort, but working with his army turned out to be quite a painful experiment, both for the IRL, so Hezbollah, and the Iranians. You have actually quite a lot of testimonies, not necessarily in Western papers, or the ones that you can hear of in the Western papers are not necessarily all reliable. But you have quite a lot of stories, you know, that you hear when you go to Lebanon and to Syria. And obviously, I had a few interviews with some people. You know, like working with the Syrian army is not an easy thing. Okay, you had like that mutual loathing between the Syrian army and the IRL and vice versa. Basically, so many points they disagreed on. Tactically, strategically, and then we even had stories about jealousy. Like, for instance, you had battalions, Syrian battalions fighting next to IRL fighters, and then what would happen is, okay, the guys, you know, they camp for lunch, and the Syrians only had like dry bread that probably dated from a week before. And then would come, you know, the wages at the end of the month. And it's in Syrian pounds and Syrian liras, and it's like basically it's a crappy wages. And they would see the Lebanese next to them, you know, having their Tupperware boxes.
Tupperware, yes. Yeah.
Their Tupperware boxes coming from Al-Hayat al-Nisaiya, the female committees of Hezbollah. So it's ladies who would prepare, you know, wara arish.
Oh,
know?
Nice. Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you know, the little tabbouleh, and we're going to add, you know, the little cookie. It's like those ladies back in Lebanon taking care of their fighters, sending all sorts of, you know, good food, goodies, you know, everything properly packed, like with meat, good greens, you know. And all the Syrians were eating, you know, as I said, dry bread, etc. They never had anything of it. And then the Lebanese would cash their wages at the end of the month in dollars, US dollars. So that also kind of created, you know, jealousies and tensions. And but at a broader level, basically what we heard more seriously is that, for instance, the Syrians supposedly, we're told, were rather hermetic, like not really disposed to listen to reform suggestions that were offered by both the Lebanese and the Iranians. And I heard, as I said, so many stories from IRL fighters complaining about the Syrians, for instance, finding the ways and the deeds of the Syrian armies in the field very shocking. Okay, and many stories about Hezbollah being betrayed so many times in the middle of a battle, okay, by the Syrians, supposedly their allies. The fact that the IRL lost uselessly troops because of the Syrians. So in the end, I think that kind of weighed a little bit too much in the Iranian/Hezbollah balance. The return on investment, to speak financially, the return on investment was not worth it. So eventually what happened is that discussions took place with the Turks and the Russians. Both Iran and Russia announced that they were withdrawing their support to the Assad regime, and that's when basically Turkey and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham with Ahmad al-Shara put things in motion. And that also explains why we didn't see any real resistance from the pro-Assad side. I'm talking Hezbollah and Iran. As you know, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham men were marching towards Damascus.
Okay. So I said in the introduction, we're going to talk a little bit about Hezbollah's allies. So basically now we have covered a significant part of their relation to Iran and to Syria. So what about Hezbollah's foes? Yeah, what do we want to start there? Maybe, I mean, there was I think like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, there was like this big talk in Western circles of the Shia-Sunni divide, like the conflict between Shia, basically Hezbollah, and the Sunni Wahhabi Saudi forces.
Saudi Arabia.
So
Yes.
maybe let's talk about Saudi Arabia and their relation to Hezbollah.
Okay. Makes sense. Okay, I would say that the problems between Saudi Arabia and Hezbollah are rather recent, relatively recent in the history of the organization, in the history of Hezbollah. And one has to be fully honest. The animosity came initially from the Saudis, not from Hezbollah. And when it started, even Hezbollah tried, to kind of calm things down a few times. They watched their tongue quite some time. And eventually when they saw that, no, the Saudis are really serious about this, they really don't like you, they really want to go after you, then this is where Hezbollah was like, what the heck? And then they started bad-mouthing the Saudis. But it wasn't something given at the beginning, okay? The relationship, actually, if you look at when Hezbollah was created and then, 90s, 2000s, etc., the relationship was actually rather positive, almost perfectly smooth till the early 2010 decade. Why? Because in the early 2010, Mohammed bin Salman became crown prince in Saudi Arabia. And he took over the upper hand in shaping the regional policy of the kingdom. And eventually several events piled up that kind of filled what I would call the powder keg between the MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and Hezbollah. Let's put it this way. Mohammed bin Salman, from the beginning, is obsessed with the Shia, which is a very Wahhabi thing, by the way. It's a very Wahhabi thing. He's obsessed with the Shia, their position in the Middle East. So it's mainly reading politics through religion, and not religion through politics. So it is first a confessional problem before being a political rivalry based one. MBS is into hardcore Wahhabism when it comes to the ideology stand from the Shia. We had former kings in Saudi Arabia before him who were, and actually most of them were, way more moderate on this point. And this is why basically that whole Shia-Sunni divide didn't make sense, honestly, in the Middle East before the mid-2000s with the American invasion of Iraq, and then Saudi Arabia basically kind of fueling the thing. And if you look at Lebanon in particular, for instance, already in 2008, Saudi Arabia intervened in Lebanon to sabotage a ceasefire that was just decided between Sunni people and Alawis, so meaning Shia. Fighters of both sides were fighting in the north of Lebanon. We had a few casualties. So Hezbollah took part in the process of, pacification, and eventually, signed a treaty with Salafi sheikhs, Salafi clerics representing the Sunnis in the north, and everybody agreed to, put the arms, the weapons aside. The problem is Saudi Arabia didn't like the idea of having their own proteges, so those Salafi sheikhs, the Salafi clerics who just, signed a deal with Hezbollah. They didn't like the idea of a deal between their protege that would, build an entente with Hezbollah. So they had their other Sunni protege, which is Saad Hariri, prime minister, who was so he's the son of the former prime minister Rafik Hariri, and he had Saad Hariri cancel the deal for a ceasefire. And then the next day, the conflict resumed, and 10 extra people died. Hezbollah didn't criticize the kingdom then. They didn't blame them for the new dead. Okay, they remained at that time. They remained really calm, moderate, and they really didn't want things to escalate. But then, as I said, a few years later, we saw a choice from Saudi officials to arm and fund Sunni Wahhabi jihadi groups in Syria. That's when the civil war started. So the Saudis obviously started to chip in and to arm some groups. And that obviously bothered Hezbollah in Iran. The thing also at a more Lebanese level, the thing that kind of pissed Hezbollah, but not just Hezbollah, by the way, quite a lot of people in Lebanon against Saudi Arabia is what happened in November 2017. In November 2017, Mohammed bin Salman abducted the Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri, okay? And that didn't help, as I said, the image that the Hezbollah had at that time of the Saudis, because Hezbollah at that time supported the Sunni Prime Minister Saad Hariri. We just, in 2016 in Lebanon, we just had finally an end to a big 2-year-long institutional crisis. We didn't have a president from 2014 and 2016 ready. And so we came to a huge reconciliation between the Christians, the Sunnis, the Shia in Lebanon. Hezbollah was part, obviously, of that reconciliation. Everybody was happy. And guess what? The Saudis came and sabotaged everything, put everything into pieces. They abducted Saad al-Hariri, forced him from Riyadh to resign his position as prime minister. He had to give a speech where basically he blamed Iran and Hezbollah for everything. So that was acceptable, obviously, by nobody in Lebanon, not even the Sunnis. But that definitely really didn't help the relationship between Hezbollah and Mohammed bin Salman basically to improve. The only party in Lebanon that was happy at that time with the abduction and the whole mess was what we call the Lebanese forces. And when I say the Lebanese forces, I'm not talking about the Lebanese army. Lebanese forces, Major L, Major F, Lebanese Forces Organization, which is a party that basically emerged from a former militia that was active in the civil wars, a far-right militia head by a guy called Samir Jaja. Samir Jaja was the only one happy with that, and actually for a very particular reason. It is Samir Jaja himself, for a large part of what happened, who came up with the idea of abducting the prime minister. 1 month before the abduction, he was in Saudi Arabia, and we were told through the grapevine later on that he was the one who pushed the idea to the Saudis. So, as I said, from a Saudi point of view, from a Saudi angle, it is first and foremost a religion-based ideological animosity, while from a Hezbollah point of view, it's a more realistic or pure political disagreement. The fact that the Saudis are Sunnis or even Wahhabis is not necessarily a problem per se for Hezbollah. Like, okay, they don't like it, but that it's not because they like it. It's not because of that they don't like something that they're going to wage war on it. Like, they can honestly adapt and adjust to quite a lot of things. The way Hezbollah sees Saudi Arabia today, and that's definitely a problem for them, they see that the Saudis have actively, or at least this is the way they read it, they consider that the Saudis have actively turned their back to the Palestinian cause, and that under Mohammed bin Salman, the Abraham Accords, who brought basically the Israelis together with a certain number of Arab Gulf countries, that fact is for them, from a Hezbollah point of view, like a big treason. Okay, Saudi Arabia basically for decades supported the Palestinian cause without obviously cutting ties with the Americans. So they were playing a little bit on the two tableaus, but all the same, they supported, for instance, the Palestinians by either trying to push forward more fair agreements for the Palestinians in order, to negotiate a peace with Israel. Like they tried to push a certain number of drafts for peace treaties with Israel. They also helped the Palestinians financially quite a lot of Saudi money was offered by the Saudis to the Palestinians. They participated so many times in rebuilding Gaza after every Israeli major attack. And the way Hezbollah sees it, not only Hezbollah, quite a lot of the quite a lot of people, quite a lot of even governments or organizations in the Middle East tend to see the Saudis now as, having completely dropped the ball when it comes to defending the Palestinians, etc. And that bothers Hezbollah way more than the fact that Saudi Arabia is Sunni or Saudi Arabia is Wahhabi.
All right. So we spoke about Saudi Arabia. Now, one could say maybe another foe, another opponent. Clearly, one of the biggest enemies of the US, at least, is Hezbollah. They are pretty angry at Hezbollah and want to see them defeated. So maybe we talk a little bit about the relationship of Hezbollah with the West, if it's possible to generalize it in such a way.
Yeah, when it comes to the West, okay. Well, let's start with the US, since you mentioned them. I would say that Hezbollah's position when it comes to the US, it's a little bit like with Saudi Arabia, in the sense that Hezbollah, contrary to what some people in the West may think, Hezbollah is not opposed to the US for what they are, okay? I remember somebody was like shocked because they saw a Hezbollah guy who had like that New York team, the baseball cap, like on his head.
This NYC thing or something.
Exactly, the NYC. And he was like, how come, they're not consistent with their ideology? No, they're perfectly consistent. They have no problem. Actually, quite a lot of people, pro-Hezbollah Lebanese, live in the US, and they can be actually be nationals, and they're perfectly okay with that. Hezbollah opposed the Americans for their policy in the Middle East. Okay, they don't threaten the liberty, the sovereignty, the identity, the culture of the US. They're, as I said, I mean, they're quite all right actually with quite a lot of things that can be typically American. They can go to McDonald's. KFC. It's not a war of civilization. I remember in the early 2000s, one big neocon
Huntington
in America. No, it wasn't that one. He shall remain anonymous out of mercy coming from me. But the guy basically wrote a whole book saying it was like either jihad or McDonald's, like you have to choose. It's jihad or Pepsi. And no, it can't be.
That's this narrative of they hate us for our freedoms.
Yeah, exactly. Right? They hate us for what we are. They hate us because we're free, because we're civilized. Because absolutely not. Okay, they will never attack McDonald's in Beirut. They have way better things to do with their time and their energy, and they're not gonna assault obviously American citizens because of their American support, the American support for Israel. No. It's really ideological and political. It's like, okay, we don't like what you're doing in the Middle East. We don't think you're well-intended, that your policies are well-intended towards Muslims in general, Arabs in general. We don't like the way you don't make any difference between Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah and Hamas. We don't like the fact that you don't understand anything to Islam. Like, please make an effort to be a bit more knowledgeable and a little bit more respectful of our differences. And this is it. And when it comes to the Europeans, okay, so Hezbollah obviously does not have much respect for the UK, never had, because, and just like actually quite a lot of people in the Middle East, not just Hezbollah. I think any average person in the Middle East will show a high probability to think like Hezbollah when it comes to the UK, and the image of the UK being, just an extension of the American administration in the Middle East. They tend to see the British and the Americans as interchangeable when it comes to being active in the Middle East. So the way they see that Great Britain is, Great Britain has toxic, aggressive policies against Arabs and Muslims for the sake of Israel. So they tend to see either America or the UK as proxies of the Israelis in the Middle East. And when it comes to the European part in particular, I must say that it is a fact that in this regard, France has always been a kind of an exception. France, to start with, has a good relationship with Hezbollah, and for quite some time now, yes. But even historically, if you look at the Gaullist governments, okay, Gaullist as a reference to Charles de Gaulle, okay, the big resistant general who, sent his call in June 1940 from London, calling the French resistance to come and join him in London and organize a resistance force against the forces of Vichy, the government of Vichy, who was obviously in business with Nazi Germany. So since then, the Gaullist trend maintained to kind of managed to maintain itself as a political ideology in France, and obviously it rhymes with a sovereignist trend and an anti-American, or at least an anti-American intervention in the French, whether domestic policy or foreign policy. So if you look at the Gaullist governments that we had since 1945 in France, they tend to be quite ill-intended towards Lebanon in general and the Lebanese. And obviously, since Hezbollah was created, the governments, in particular of Jacques Chirac, okay, more recently, were very influential in Lebanese politics and tend to take a rather comprehensive stand when it came to Hezbollah and the place of Hezbollah in Lebanon, whether in domestic policy or in its actions against Israel. Jacques Chirac himself defended actually quite, a few times. He defended Hezbollah against Israeli diplomats, saying, especially in the 90s, he presented them as freedom fighters. At some point, he said he wasn't sure they were a terrorist organization, etc. And then with, I would say, Nicolas Sarkozy and his French and the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, Bernard Kouchner, this is where basically the let's put it this way, the diplomatic bridges were officially established with Hezbollah. Bernard Kouchner said it many times in 2008. He said, yes, I know that the Germans do not want to have any contact with Hezbollah. They refuse to deal, for instance, with Hezbollah ministers in the Lebanese governments. We, as French, we don't have a problem with that. We invited to France several times several Hezbollah officials, whether MPs, ministers, etc. Emmanuel Macron maintained that newly formed tradition. And actually, I noticed two details that were quite telling in 2023, 2024. So when Hassan Nasrallah, former Secretary General of Hezbollah, mentioned for the first time, the conflict and the way he saw the conflict and Hezbollah's part in the conflict. So that was in early November 2023. He was very harsh with the Americans, very harsh with the British, obviously very harsh with Israel. He didn't say a bad word on France. Super nice. And it was noticeable because it came at a time where the French diplomacy, especially the presidential diplomacy, Emmanuel Macron had quite a lot of problems in terms of popularity in the Arab countries. Quite a lot of Arab countries were pissed at Emmanuel Macron, and Hezbollah didn't have anything bad to say about the French, to a point that somebody in one of my colleagues was like, he made a joke about it, and he said, who could foretell that Hezbollah would be the last Arab friends of Emmanuel Macron in the Middle East? Obviously, it was a joke. But another detail is that the other way around, when Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated in September 2024, quite a lot of, prime ministers, presidents in the West came forward to say, good riddance, it was good news. Emmanuel Macron was rather discreet about that, didn't make any real comment about, how glad he was to see Hassan Nasrallah dead. We only had like that little episode, I would say, under the socialist government, or I would say the government under socialist president François Hollande, where eventually the French had a kind of different stand when it comes to Hezbollah. So let's put it this way: for quite some time, Israel and the US, they tried, in the 90s, in the 2000s, and even early 2010 to bring the EU to obviously register Hezbollah as a terrorist organization on their official list. And France was always the blocking part, saying, no, we will not vouch for that. Hezbollah is a complicated organization, not a terrorist one, etc. Until, as I said, 2012, when the government under François Hollande is a socialist, and the Socialist Party actually in France has always had a tradition of being strongly on the Israeli side. So in 2012, this is the first time where the French government accepted to actually enlist not Hezbollah, but the IRL, so only the military part of the organization, on the list of the terrorist organizations, basically drafted by the EU. But that didn't change anything in practice when it came to the French government, French representative working with Hezbollah, so basically the civil part of the organization.
Okay, I can't help but notice that you haven't talked about Germany. You mentioned Germany in there, but yeah, let's say something. I mean, ultimately, here it is defined as a terrorist organization, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. What about Germany?
And finally, there's Germany. Yes. Okay. Hezbollah, I must say, is disappointed.
Oh, Germany. Really?
I'm quoting Hezbollah officials, like, damn. They're disappointed. Obviously, they're disappointed because they're horrified with the fact that the German unconditional support for the Israeli brutality in the war against the Palestinians and the Lebanese. In 2023, 2024, that was a little bit shocking. And then the way Hezbollah sees things is that they felt that Germany stabbed, not Hezbollah, but Lebanon as a whole, the Lebanese in general. They stabbed the Lebanese in the back because Germany is part of the UNIFIL, okay, the United Nations Blue Helmets forces that are stationed in South Lebanon. They have obviously troops there, and they're in charge with the naval, anything related to the sea force, the maritime force of the UNIFIL. So they're expected to have a neutral, unbiased stance. They're supposed not to stand in favor of any party, neither Israel nor Lebanon. But the way things happened in 2023, 2024, is that Germany obviously had some role in the abduction by Israel of a Lebanese marine captain in the north of the country. That means that basically the Israelis it was in November 2024, the Germans basically, rather than block the access to the Lebanese national waters to the Israelis, they let the Israelis get into the Lebanese sovereign waters, and let obviously the Israelis, reach the northern part of the coast, carry out the abduction, and then go back with their hostage all the way to Israel. And so Hezbollah obviously was pissed, but actually other political parties too. Like, this is not what we are used to coming from Germany. And when I say Hezbollah is disappointed by Germany, it's also because for quite some time, actually for many years, Germany has played a positive role in managing the communication, I would say, between Israel and Hezbollah, because obviously Israel and Hezbollah do not talk directly. Okay. But for quite a certain number of years, Germany acted as a neutral, efficient intermediary between Hezbollah and Israel in every swap operation between the two in the 80s and the 90s, in the 2000s. The Germans every time played, like the letterbox between the two, organizing the mediation between the two, and Hezbollah always, said they were very satisfied with the German services. But 2023 and 2024 definitely changed the image that Hezbollah has of the Germans, and Hezbollah actually officially voiced their wish and their plan to ask the Germans to step down. And obviously, they asked the Lebanese government to do whatever is necessary to have the Germans ousted from the UNIFIL and replaced by some other troops from another country.
Okay. Good. I mean, really, we basically through the series at least as we planned it.
Yeah. Sorry it took so much time. We were supposed to do once a week, but
it's okay. We got 5 episodes. I encourage everyone really to listen back front to back, because these are very interesting. Of course, they are based on the content of this book, Hezbollah Mobilization and Power. But of course, they are also a little bit more up to date, as this book is a couple of years old. And we hope it's not the last time you join us, Aurélie. There will be probably plenty of occasions where we need your opinion. So,
it's been a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your professionalism. I definitely enjoyed both the conversations with you and the comments and the questions in the comments, etc. That was really a very nice experience. So if you are in the mood to call me back,
we'll definitely call.
There's a high probability that I won't say no.
We'll definitely call, and the pleasure was all mine. Really, it was some of the highlights of my work here on the podcast. So thanks for that. It was really great. Okay. Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks for commenting, and see you soon. Bye bye.
Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Wenn euch dieses Video gefallen hat, klickt auf Like, abonniert den Kanal und vergesst nicht das Glöckchen zu drücken, damit ihr benachrichtigt werdet, wenn wir neuen Content droppen.
Außerdem solltet ihr uns überall folgen, wo wir verfügbar sind. Das ist Facebook, Instagram, Twitter und Twitch. Und wenn wir irgendwelche Ankündigungen machen oder Posts, dann shared, was das Zeug hält. Gebt uns all eure Liebe.
Wir haben mittlerweile ziemlich signifikante Kosten. Wenn ihr es euch irgendwie leisten könnt, unterstützt uns doch auf Patreon. Dann kommt ihr auch in den Genuss verschiedener Vorteile, wie zum Beispiel Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community oder Zugang zu den ultra-geheimen Patreon-Episoden, die wir dort posten. Außerdem könnt ihr uns natürlich auch über PayPal Spenden zukommen lassen.
Außerdem haben wir mittlerweile einen eigenen Online-Shop. Das heißt, wenn ihr euch immer noch fragt, was ihr euren Lieben zu Weihnachten, Ostern oder sonst wie schenken könnt, geht dorthin und kauft duftes Merch.
Alle Links dazu hier in der Beschreibung oder auch auf unserer Webseite 99zu1.de.
Vielen Dank fürs Dabeisein, danke für die Unterstützung und wir sehen uns in diesem Theater.